Okay, I think we're live. Just let me have a look if everything is. Yeah, so we're live. We're live with another session and another session of Beyond Code. And we are having people joining in. A very good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. A very good evening for the people who are joining us from India and people who are watching us from East, West, and Abu Dhabi and other countries of Gulf. Yeah, I think there was another glitch with the live streaming, but yeah, I think, yeah, thank you for joining in for another exclusive session of Beyond Code. We have a very interesting panel today and very excited to have a very exciting speaker today. A little bit about Marcos Muller-Habig. He's actually working with 42 Dubai 42 Abu Dhabi, and he's also a CTO and a CEO, and he's actually one of the tech leaders. So in Beyond Code Conversation today, we are having an interview with the tech leaders who are inspiring and also making a great impact in the industries and the company they are working with. And a little bit about Marcos. He worked with different industries. He's managing over 25 enterprises, and he has been recognized as an outstanding influencer and business partner who delivers world-class integrated solutions to the companies. And thank you so much, Marcos, for joining us today. And we are very happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And before we actually begin with his journey, everyone, so I have a very interesting thing to say. So when I hopped on a call with Marcus before the interview, when I heard his story, I knew it was something very unique and very inspiring, not just for motivating people in tech, but also people in tech and developers could learn how he leveraged tech into business and how is making a huge impact by tech. And growing the revenues of the company he's working with, and how he leveraged tech, to be one of the greatest pillar for his businesses that he's working with, right? And thank you once again, Marcos. And how are you doing? And how's everything at Abu Dhabi?
Good. Very excited to be here. It's getting a little hot now in Abu Dhabi, but we're still pretty good. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise, it's same in India, but we are very excited to hear you and hear all your stories, hear all your journey. And as much as I was excited to hear it, and I would love to share that with your audience today who's joining us. So, Marcos, let's rewind and have a glimpse of young you. So, what were you interested in, and what were you interested as a kid? How did you develop interest in computers? Because I knew that you were a gamer back then, right? Which is relevant into the generations right now, but you were the one back then. So how was it, and how did you discover computers? Yes.
So it kind of all started a very, very long time ago. My mom, so I grew up in Brazil. Technology at the time, and I'm sure you guys can relate. Technology in third world countries takes a while to get there, right? So at a certain point growing up, my mom brought in a Super Nintendo into the house, and we immediately got hooked onto that. And so I've always been kind of fascinated with technology. It was always about the understanding of how does something work. It's the curiosity of what drives the function, what makes it work. So from a very early age, I started working, playing games and trying to figure out how things worked. And then from there, it was about taking apart computers and seeing how they work. Like, how do you put one together? What does it mean? What are the results? How can you get there? Early days of dial-up internet and figuring out the way those things are working and networking. And it seemed fascinating to me at the whole time. And I always thought that I would go to school for technology. I always thought I was going to go to school for computer science, that I would do that. And initially, that was the plan. So I went to high school. I finished my high school in Brazil, and I wanted to go to university in the US. And so I did. I applied, and I was accepted at Florida Institute of Technology. And that was when I got there, and I started realizing that the freedom of your time and the choices that you make as an adult are not always the best in your best interests. So I started not going to class. I started playing video games. I started playing a lot of video games and going less to class, and more video games, less class. And eventually I received a very nice letter from my university that said, we would like you to no longer attend. So I was kicked out of university, and I appealed. And they said, okay, fine, you have one more semester to turn things around. And then next semester, they sent me a letter saying the decision is final, you can no longer appeal. So I was heartbroken. But at this point, I was a professional gamer. I was playing, at the time, World of Warcraft, and I was, there were events and all sorts of stuff. And so I was okay. I felt like I was okay. But after a while, through my early 20s, I realized I had left my home country to go to that university. I'm going to finish from that university. And so I reapplied, and I tried to get back into that university, and they rejected me. They said, no, we gave you 2 chances. Why should we do it again? So I said, fair point, but I'm not going to give up. So I spent a week in the office of the dean. I wrote letters to absolutely everyone. Eventually, they got tired of hearing from me, and they said, fine, we'll readmit you with certain conditions. I met all the conditions. I was able to, I was under academic probation, and I was able to eventually graduate from Florida Institute of Technology. But at that point, my interest had shifted. So I graduated with 2 bachelors, one in business administration and one in marketing. Technology was always part of my life, but I thought that I did not want to be an employee my whole life. So I wanted to know what made a business run. But because technology was part of my life, the very first thing that I did was I got a job in an IT consulting company, right? So consulting is kind of that middle ground, right? It's a bit of that, a little bit of everything. You get exposure to different industries. And so it was very interesting for me to be able to apply things that I had learned and see how businesses operated. And so my first project was an SAP consulting project in which we were doing it for Nissan of North America. So I was exposed to a major company. The risks were severe of doing an upgrade to an ERP system for a company that big. All of North America, it's Nissan, and so it was very formative, very, very formative, and very difficult. It was a very difficult project. Shortly after that, I realized that this was not the direction I wanted to go with in my career. It involved a lot of travel, it involved a lot of hours, it involved a lot of time, a lot of sacrifices, and I just wanted more stability. At the same time, this caused me not to be the best employee. And so this came the second formative experience that I would say of my career, when the company also decided that I was not a good fit for them, and they fired me. And because I was living in the US, they had my visa. So I could no longer stay in the US. I had a couple of friends in UAE. So I packed my bags and I came to UAE, and I was here for supposed to be 10 days. And that was 10 years ago, and I have never left. So I since got a job at one of the sovereign wealth funds here, working in their technology team, and then they created a BPO subsidiary. So we were offering IT services, facility management services, and BPO services. So I started in the selling of IT services and technology services, in the account management space and the contracts, negotiations, and things like that. And then I went into the commercial discipline for the whole company. And then I decided that, it was time to do something different. And since I was recruited for this exciting project related to education, which is 42 Abu Dhabi. 42 Abu Dhabi is a non-profit educational institution for coding. Only coding. We have no teachers, we have no lectures, we have no classes. It's completely peer-to-peer. It's a completely disruptive environment. And it was very, very exciting. And when they recruited me, they wanted someone that could take care of the startup portion of it, the business portion of it, but also the technology, deploying the technology here, deploying the methodology, the curriculum. And that's all stuff that I had done throughout my career, right? So it was a good fit. And when I came here, I was the CTO for a year before the CEO left. And then they appointed me as acting CEO while also being CTO. And so it's been now a little over a year now as acting CEO, and it's been very, very interesting. And now we're working on what's next for 42 Abu Dhabi. How do we expand? How do we have a bigger impact? So the whole point is to have accessible coding education for all, to be able to have anyone of any walk of life successful. 40% of our students have never written a line of code before joining us. So it is very much about open to everyone, and there's no barriers to entry. Anybody can apply. You don't need a specific diploma. You don't need GMATs, no GREs. It's a very different model of education. And I think that's what really drew me in. That's what I found very exciting about it. So yeah, that's a brief history of my life so far.
Yes. Now that we have a brief history, I think we'll be very excited to dwell down into each part of your journey. How what projects that you worked in, and what were the challenges, sure. And which industries that you came across all your professional journey, and what were the stuff, and how were you evolved as a person, as a tech enthusiast, and also a leader, right? And coming to that, Marcos. So now that you told about your first job where you got laid off, right? So what were the challenges that you faced in the very first few stuff? Like you were working with a very major project. So when you got laid off, what are the challenges? What was running in your mind? And how did you start your company? How did you start your designation in that company? And how did that transform you?
So for me, I think looking back now, I realized that I was not a good employee. At the time, I thought I was. At the time, I thought I was doing everything right. But the reality of the situation is the only reason I can say that I thought I was doing things right is because the methodology or the way that I learned was incorrect. And I only know that since working at 42 Abu Dhabi. I wasn't taking enough initiative. I wasn't trying to learn more about the business. There is something to be said that I was working with a very senior team. The second person in the team with the least amount of experience had 20 years of experience. So when you get someone fresh out of college and someone that has 20 years experience, there's going to be a massive gap, right? It was a very, very, very specialized team. They were absolute, every single one of them were the top of their field. We were a very small team. There was only 4 of us. Even though we were managing multiple other outsourcers that were also all coming together to deliver this, really we were essentially seen as the subject matter experts when it came to this project. And part of my job of what I did was related to application testing, as well as triaging, ticketing, communications, things like that. All of that made sense, but I was not taking enough initiative to understand how it impacted the business, what each thing did, what the application was. And nor was there any time. It was expected that everybody just kind of knew their role and knew what to do. And looking back, I understand that this was a bit of a success. It was a recipe for failure. They had never hired anyone out of college. It was a bit of an experiment to hire me. It was a complete one-off, and I don't think they ever do it again. I think they learned their lesson. Because there was just no ability to really show someone from the beginning. But that being said, with SAP, with these large softwares, everything you need to know is out there. Everything. I know that now. I should have done a lot more, and I probably would not have been laid off. But I think that was exactly what happened. It's the looking back into what caused the layoff, what caused me to get fired, is super formative, right? I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what could I have done different, what could I have done better, how would I be able to succeed. And so it was really important for me to go through that. It was really important for me to look back, and sometimes the biggest life lessons are failures, and this was unequivocally a failure. And I can recognize that. I can see exactly what the symptoms are. I can see what it means. It was also not a very healthy work environment. And so it wasn't, I wasn't exactly heartbroken about it. We were putting in 80, 90-hour weeks all the time. It wasn't something that I was necessarily upset about, but it was at the time, it's very heartbreaking, right? Because in the beginning of your career, you're very much, your job defines you. And when you're studying, the effort that you put in is usually directly correlative to the results that you get. The more you study, the better your score. Here at the job or at work, it didn't matter where I deployed my effort. I was just going to fail because of all the different factors that were outside of my control. And so that was a very important life lesson as well, because it's sometimes you could do everything right and still fail. Now, today, with experience, I know what I could have done better, but at the time, I was doing everything that I could have. So it was also very formative in that regards, in the sense of like, hey, this is a very different environment to school. It's a very different environment to education. So it was very, very, very important to me, but at the time, heartbreaking.
Yeah. So now that you look back at your very first company and the very first experience that you had outside the college, right? And now that you could retrospect, what were the mistakes that you have done? What would you recommend the students getting out of universities, or at least any professional starting their job in the very first company? What's something that they need to look after, so that the experience will be set as the very first pillar for their professional journey, without being a setback for the initiation of the professional journey? So what would that be?
So I think there's two major factors. One is never stop learning, never ever get comfortable, never ever ever stop learning. Always look for the next tool set. Always look at what you can do beyond what you can add value to yourself, to the company. Try to understand exactly what you do that contributes to the company as a whole. Like what does your role do to contribute to the mission of the company? If you can figure that out, you're already ahead of almost everyone in the company, right? And most companies are very bad at cascading that down, of saying, this is our objective, this is our goal, and this is how everybody contributes to that goal and how we come together as a whole. People tend to get caught in the operations aspect of it, but it's not important. It's what are you doing to achieve the objectives, right? Whether it's yearly, the next 5 years, whatever. So understanding that role is really important, because it may tell you that the efforts that you're dispersing are not focused on what they should be, right? There tends to be quite a lot of wasted effort on things that may not be the most important thing. So never stop learning about the company, never stop learning about what you're doing, never stop learning about your role and your job. And you'll realize that when you join a year later, everybody, what they told you how to do your job, they were probably wrong. You will eventually learn the reality or the truth of how to do your job. So I think that would kind of be number one. And number two, most importantly, manage your manager. Manage your manager. Talk to them, communicate with them, understand their expectations, understand their needs, understand their wants. Try to preempt their wishes rather than trying to do things your own way. Because more often than not, you're going to find that it's much better for you if you understand how your manager operates, rather than you try to assume it's a specific way. Right. So some managers may build trust very quickly, and they'll give you the ability to make mistakes, while other managers don't want you to make mistakes and they expect you to behave very safely. They're vastly different approaches. You need to understand how much flexibility you have, and how much risk you can take as an employee in making your own decisions, right? If a manager is empowering you and you're not taking advantage of that, it is a detriment to yourself. It's a detriment to your career, right? On the flip side, if a manager is not empowering you, they're expecting you to be completely risk adverse, and you're trying to take on risk, it's also going to reflect poorly on you. So you need to kind of understand that relationship of your manager, of how they behave, in order for you to be able to preempt also how you need to behave. So I think that's usually one of the more important things, is learning that people tend to not quit jobs, they quit managers. And if you don't understand your manager, if you're not able to build a good working relationship, you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, so getting to that, so the very first company, what was your designation? So which domain were you working in, Marcus, in your very first company, and then what did you switch into for the next?
So when I graduated, the very first thing I was an associate consultant for SAP. So I was an associate SAP consultant, and the that was the role, that was it. The majority of the thing, I was working on was more during so just before I was doing application testing, so individual testing of applications within the SAP function, and then once everything was done and all the applications were testing, we were ready. When we were going to cut over into the upgraded system, I was in charge of triage, ticketing, problem management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a module within SAP called Solution Manager. So I was kind of in charge of implementing a little bit of a Solution Manager, and keeping track of all the tickets, making sure that they were logged and closed. Because during my university, I was working as a student employee as help desk, as tech support. So it made sense, right? I was able to communicate. I understood the process and how tickets came in and the triage. And so it was a very basic, very, very basic start. And it was awesome. I loved it. I loved doing support in the beginning. It was very, very interesting, answering, emails, tickets, technical support. Like, I always found it very interesting to problem solve. So it started that way. And then the second role that I joined was within Mubadala, and that was as a communication specialist. So my role was inside the technology team. How do I communicate what the technology team was doing to the wider business, right? How do you translate tech speak to what people care about?
Mm-hmm.
A delivery of a project means what? Okay, you delivered a meeting room management system. It sounds great, but what does it mean for the employees of the company? Well, it gives you an easier time to book. You can just do it in an Outlook plugin. You can select the room and the room is booked. Your name shows up on the iPad at the door. All these business benefits and efficiencies need to be translated. And us technologists are very good at saying, wow, great, a new automation, a new meeting room system, fantastic. What does that mean for the business as a whole, right? How do you translate that to the rest of the users? And so that was my initial role, which is that kind of liaison of, whatever. And if there was ever an outage or a problem, then I was in charge of communicating those as well and saying, hey, listen, this is what's happening. This is what we're doing to fix it. So it became kind of this stakeholder management position.
Yeah. So how do you develop the understanding of tech now that you said your second company, you were closely working with tech and communicating what impact they're doing in terms of business, right? So coming back to your background as a non-tech guy, right? How did you start? How did you learn coding, or how did you understand the whole how tech performs and how is it done? Like, how do you communicate to the other person? First, you need to understand yourself, and then you can understand how it works, and then you can actually try to sell what they're doing, right? So, how did that happen? Because from your first to the second, the tech superiority has increased, and then from there you got a full-fledged working with tech day in and out, right? So just a little bit understanding of how did you do that? So how did you understand and how did you start being a part of the
a
tech?
little bit of luck, and a little bit of just wanting to just understand everything. I tend to be incessant. When I don't understand something, I don't stop until I do. So I read, I research, I find books, I whatever it is. When I want to understand something, I find every way that I can. I'm incessant about it. So that's why I tend to have hobbies, and then I understand about the hobby, and then I go away. But I've always wanted to learn. So technology has always been a big part of my life. When I was gaming, I learned to code in Lua just so that I could create a user interface, right? So I basically found manuals on how to write Lua, and I understood, in high school, I used to code in Visual Basic. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of how it used to be. And then a little bit of HTML because of MySpace and those things back in the day. And so then it went kind of, okay, well, what's next? And so Lua, I was working with that and I was looking through it and for gaming. And so it just became this kind of thing where it was like, okay, well, you can learn by yourself. And so when I joined in my next role, it was just about learning and absorbing information as much as I can. And so that's what I did. I absorbed, I think the camera crashed. Oh, there you are.
Yes, sorry. Yep, I can hear it. Yeah.
No worries. So it became more about just absorbing this information and just understanding it and being able, in my head, I always heard back what somebody told me once, which is you truly understand something when you can explain it simply. Anybody who can explain something simply means that they get it, right? So my whole point was always, how do I explain something as simply as possible? How do I do that translation of, do I understand it enough to talk about it in simple enough terms? And so actually one of my favorite communities is on Reddit, which is Explain Like I'm Five. That's really where you start really knowing whether you understand something, if you can explain it to a 5-year-old, as simple as it gets. And so that's what I always try to do, which made sense in communication, right? If you can explain something simply in communication, then it means that you're absorbing that information and you're able to get people to be as excited as you are, right? To feel what you're feeling, because it becomes simple.
Yeah.
So it was a technology role, and it was also a business role, right? It was kind of explaining it to the business. So I was very, very fortunate. I will be honest, my manager took a huge risk on me. She took a huge risk on me. When she hired me, she started the interview saying, "So what do you know?" And I told her nothing. I don't know anything. And she closed her notebook and she was like, "Okay, well, I guess that's the interview." And she was about to leave. And then she was like, "So, like, why should I hire you?" And I said, "Look, whatever I don't know, whatever you need me to know, I guarantee you I'll learn it faster than somebody else." And she liked that answer. And so she kind of she understood that, yep, fair enough. Let's go. If you have the drive and the ambition, you can do it. And so that's exactly what it was. She gave me a shot, and I was not about to waste it. So it was a little bit of luck, a little bit of everything, but also, making sure that you're working and disciplined, and yeah.
So in the second company now that you were working closely with tech as a consultant, right? And what were the major projects, if we can discuss over there, Marcus? So let's say, I think you were working with a project which actually generated a revenue of 70% from tech itself, right? So a
Correct.
little bit
Yes.
about the projects and what were you solving and what were your major
Sure.
takeaways from that? Yeah.
So when this company, so this manager that took a chance on me, the company split, and we took all the internal functions, because it was a very, very large sovereign wealth fund. We took all the internal functions of IT, facilities management, HR, procurement, and finance, and we created a company that would provide those services to the entire group of companies. Why have 40 IT departments? Why have 40 HR departments, right? But this company was a startup. We were able to do each of those functions operationally, but we did not know how to do them commercially. So my job was to commercialize the technology sector into proposals, contracts, RFPs, whatever it was, including account management, keeping clients happy. Right. So it became back into that communication role. It became back into that kind of understanding role, right? If you're able to communicate it simply and convince someone of its efforts, even if you do that internally, you can also do it to a client externally and generate revenue, generate sales. So even though we had 5 functions, which is, like I said, HR, procurement, finance, facilities management, and IT, I was working in the IT function. Because of the commercial discipline that we were able to create, the IT function was responsible for 70% of the revenue of the entire company. So 5 functions, but one of them was far beyond above the others. And so the company stopped and they were like, okay, well, if IT is doing this, if technology services is doing this, how do we get the other functions to do it as well? And so that's when they created a corporate structure that basically moved everyone that was in the technology commercial team and created a commercial team that went over all the services. And so then we kind of had to recreate the same thing that we did for technology, but for all the other services, and sell facilities management, which gave me a ton of exposure into how HR works, how finance works, how procurement works, how facilities management works. It kind of allowed me to see every aspect of how the support structure of a business operates, which was an invaluable experience. I will say it was absolutely invaluable to be able to do that. This took many, many, many years, right? It took over 5 years for us to do this transition into this corporate role. While I was with technology, while we were creating the commercial discipline of technology, I also dabbled in some project management, right? We just needed some help. So I did do infrastructure deployment projects. I did do office moving projects in which we had to set up infrastructure for people. I was also in charge of disaster recovery. So the entire disaster recovery process from both for us and our clients, I was managing, and we received the only external audited, well-controlled from PwC, from an audit on PwC. So it was something that we were very proud, very successful about, and it was a lot of work. But it just I was kind of trying to find myself. I had the option to go deeper and specialize more into technology, or go more into the commercial side. And so I wanted to see a little bit of both, right? I did some project management, I did some more IT stuff. There was a project about firewall upgrades and stuff like that. And so I started a little bit on the project side, but at the same time, I realized that I really enjoyed the commercial side. I loved the revenue side. I love finding contracts. I love closing deals. I love partnerships. I think it's so competitive. It's so intense. Has such an impact. And so when given the chance to move into a centralized structure of commercial, it was a no-brainer. And so that was kind of where I was able to apply a little bit of everything. But at the end, even though I was selling all the other services, my specialty was still technology, right? So that was still kind of where most of my effort went into.
Yep, yep. So, Marcus, what goes behind the understanding of tech when it is generating the 70% of the revenue of the company, right? So, let's say we have any developer or any CTO is actually working with one of the tech-centric business, and if they're not able to generate revenue as much, so what do you think? What do you think are the lessons or something that you need to look at so that you could actually change tech as one of your greatest advantage for your business? And what do you think goes behind the tech that generates this huge amount of revenue for business alone? So what goes behind that?
For me is the thing that I really liked, that I found really interesting about technology is the ability to scale. If you plan it properly and you have the right processes, scalability is something that's natural. And it is, it becomes you have such economies of scale, and you get such awesome savings the more you scale, that it becomes very easy to snowball with your revenue. Your costs don't go up nearly as much, but your revenue can go up exponentially. It's very different with other businesses. So BPO, there's always going to be the addition of new people, new bodies. When we're talking about facilities management, right, you're always having, there's a limit because it's facilities, it's cleaners, it's hard services, it's maintenance. The margins are ridiculous. So you're always going to be fighting a losing game. You end up running into diminishing returns very quickly with other businesses. With technology, that's not the case, right? There is a major capacity investment, a CapEx investment that you do early on, but then the efficiencies that you can get from that later on actually snowball to a ridiculous amount. And so it's more about, if you are able to plan your capacity very, 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 very well and understand very, very, very well where your costs are, it's very easy to generate an enormous amount of revenue, right? Because you're able to create something that's scalable. So you may spend $1 million for one user, but you're only going to spend, let's say, $1,100,000 for 10,000 users, right? And so everything that happens in between there, every single one of those additional user licenses that you sell are just generating an enormous amount of revenue, because your costs keep just shrinking per user that you add on. So when you're consistently able to think about, okay, sure, this is great for one user, but what can I build that allows us to also be for 10,000, 100,000, et cetera, without having to completely duplicate your efforts, that's when you know that you're able to generate a lot of revenue for not that much cost. So for me right now, if I were to open up another campus, I would not create another data center like I have here. I would not deploy the same virtual machines, right? Because I've already deployed it. What I would do is I wouldn't plan for one more campus. I would plan for 5 more campuses. I would centralize it in a cloud environment that would allow me to say, sure, today I have 16 VMs or whatever, 20 VMs. If I have another campus, instead of 40, it'll be 35. If I have another campus, So right, so you're creating efficiencies the more that you scale. If you're able to plan like that, then it's very, very easy to allow revenue to take over without increasing your costs too much.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that also, works immensely when most of the companies, they actually go off track when it comes to scaling, mostly in tech. Now that I talk to developers, right? And the major problem that they have during the scale of, let's say, even the application or website or any app that they're building, right? So the efficiency kind of drops when you're trying to scale to, let's say, from 100 users to a million users or maybe a billion users, right? And what would you advise for someone like that? When they think that scalability is inversely proportional to the efficiency of what you're working with or what application
So
or productivity or something.
it's it's a little bit complicated, and to me, it's on a case by case basis. Sorry, I just choked on my water. So there needs to be a point where you're starting out that you shouldn't necessarily be planning for a billion users. There's a point where you need to get your app out the door. There's a point where you need to have an MVP. There's a point where you need to have a prototype. There's a point where efficiency might not be at your forefront. I completely agree. There's a point where you just need to have a working product. And yes, at some point, it may be a nightmare that you have to kind of go back and try to fix those issues to create scalability. But it is super important to be able to do that rather than keep patching things over and over and over and over again. Because there will come a certain point where the pain of redoing the work is bigger than the benefit. And so what ends up happening is you start running at the end of the life cycle of the journey, right? When that happens, when it's too much effort for you to redo, but you cannot afford not to redo it, you are starting the lower end of the life cycle. You're running towards the end of the life cycle of your product. And that becomes a problem, right? You need to be able to extend that curve as much as possible. And so as much as you can, plan to go back and work in a very iterative process. And I'm sure most of them are doing this when it comes to agile methodologies and things like that, which is, do, test, verify, deploy, and then restart the process again. Look at it from the beginning again. What are the lessons learned? What did you do better? What can you do better? Let's fix that, reiterate on that process, reiterate on that portion, do it again and do it again. And just keep doing that, because that creates an ability to scale the more that you do that. So that's kind of where it's being able to look ahead and see, okay, well, today we grew from 10 to 100, tomorrow 100 to 10,000. Oh God, okay, this could be something that goes from 10,000 to a million. We need to start looking into what that would look like, right? Because are we even able to do that? And so it's very, very, very important to keep thinking about that, but also not to focus on that. Don't prevent your growth. Don't stop your growth because you're searching for efficiencies. You will get into diminishing returns. At a certain point, it's not going to be, the efficiencies may not be worth it. But it is, if it is a difference between you scaling your business and not, you absolutely need to focus that. And sometimes you need to have that hard decision of, hey, rip the Band-Aid off. Let's redo it now. It takes 6 months, but we'll be in a much better place in 2 years.
Yeah, that's definitely there. Yeah, I think around the same time you were shifting to the east from the west, right? I think you were in USA, and for your the current company that you're working with, you shifted to Gulf, and I think you shifted to Abu Dhabi. How was your experience? Settling in different cultures. Someone who was brought up in Brazil, and then you did your schooling in US, and then when you actually came to Abu Dhabi and Gulf places, right? So how was the culture, and how did you how was your experience as someone from the West settling in and trying to work it out over here with tech, with business, and with culture? Did you have any cultural shocks? So how was the whole
Oh
experience
yeah,
for you?
massive. God, cultural shock, massive, massive. So from a culture perspective, I think Brazil is very, very similar to the East, especially the Middle East. I think there's a lot of overlaps between Hispanic culture and Arab culture. Not to mention that we have a massive Lebanese population in Brazil, so there's obviously a lot of influence there. But there's a lot of overlap into the whole kind of community and family and people together, which is very, very different from the US. It's very different from Europe. And so I already had a bit of a culture shock there, but my working culture was very different when I first got here to what it is now. Because I worked in the US, I tend to be very, very, very direct. And there are other nationalities that may not be as direct. So sometimes I may come across as rude or direct or rough, and it's not something that I mean. I am very, very, I'm pretty bad at pleasantries. So, if I pick up the phone to call someone about work, I'm like, hey, what's going on? Hey, listen, this is my problem. Whereas here, people talk a lot. They ask, hey, how's the family? How's the kids? How's everything? And so I had to learn to kind of adapt to be that way. And it's just about being sensitive to other cultures and other nationalities. It was very difficult for me at first to be able to do that. It was very difficult for me to learn and to say, okay, how do we approach this? How do we do this talk and stuff like that? So it took some effort. It took some doing, but the first year was very difficult. The culture shock was severe. And then I heard, by year 3 or 4, I was thinking, okay, I've been here a while. I think it's time to move back. And then I kept hearing every one of my friends who said, hey, if you're here 5 years, you're going to be here 10. And I laughed. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be here 10 years. And I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary in November, and I have no desire to go anywhere else. So it's been a journey. It's been a decade, but it's so interesting to be able to be exposed to so many different nationalities. We have 51 nationalities and students. In my staff alone, every single one of my staff is from a different nationality. We have no repeat of nationalities in any of my staff members. So it is super interesting. It's, you're constantly learning, but I think one of the biggest things is also learning that you don't know everything. And so be pleasant about it. If you're curious, people will want to share with you. Don't be rude, don't be difficult, and understand that you're going to mess up. You're going to mess up, and just take it on the chin and learn from it. And so that's what I try to do.
Yeah. So Marcos, how was tech different from the one in US to the one they are actually, working and building in the East? Because US being one of the most developed nations in the entire world, and I know that UA is no less than that, but then maybe it's not has reached to a point of US, right? So what is the differences in tech, and how people operate in tech, and how you would see the changes and the differences when it comes to technology, of understanding it or maybe working on it? Sure. Or understanding the problem. How was it different from the US to UAE when it comes to tech? Yeah.
So tech in the US is obviously very cutting edge. That's expected. They're always looking to be on the bleeding edge of it. And in UAE, though, what I really like is the outcome of technology. A lot of times in the US, the purpose of technology is to generate a return. I give you $1, I get back 2. It's a very transactional interaction between what they do with automation, with technology. It's always a business decision. There's no emotion to it. It's always a business decision. If I input $100, I get $200 out of it. It is always monetary. It's the prime of capitalism. UAE is a lot more strategic. So the way that they deploy technology can have rippling effects rather than a return on a monetary investment. It could be a societal impact. It could be a cultural impact. It could be to diversify the economy. Understanding that 82 cents of every dollar generated in UAE leaves the country means that when you're looking to develop something that brings things here, that brings talent here, it doesn't necessarily have to be the most cutting edge. It already has an impact on the country, right? So if you have a startup here that is able to employ people, that is able to bring people here, these people are paying rent, they're paying their bills, it's all working to diversify the economy. And that is considered a net win, which in the US may not be, because they don't take those things into account. So the shift is less, the difference between the two is more about the outcome of what they expect technology projects to be. It's not always going to be about a dollar return. You have to think bigger. You have to think macro. What impact may this have in society and culture and communication in people? And it's what the leadership of UAE is mostly looking towards, which is why I'm very fond of this place, which is why I think the leadership here are doing an amazing job. It's more about strategic, the people impact, the longevity, the diversification, rather than give me $2 for every dollar that I give you. And I think it's just a much healthier relationship when it comes to technology and investments.
And I think that was where you also kind of diversify yourself when it comes to just, stepping out of the domain of tech, where you worked with other projects and had like the 360-degree outlook on how tech is impacting business, right? And coming to that, you also worked with BMS and I think closely with the BPO services in UAE. What were the major challenges you faced while working on it, and how did you overcome them? And the project was one of the greatest success of your professional careers. So how was that? Like everything about it, like what were the challenges, and how did you build
Sure.
one of the
So
successful projects?
that's when I mentioned that we were doing that commercial discipline layer, is when we were doing the BPO. So for me, the success was that we were able to make the company successful, right? But I think the major challenges that we faced is that we were not the cheapest in the market. And I think that's the hardest part for us. It was very, very, very easy for someone to outsource, right? UAE is very close to India, is very close to the Philippines, is very close to a lot of countries that do very, very, very good job of taking in these services and delivering them. So we did not have a strategic advantage when it came to price. We did not have, it was very difficult for us to be able to convince clients. So if it wasn't about price, what was it about? And that's where we had to start really understanding the businesses of our clients and say where we were adding value rather than we were price competitive. And that's kind of where it required to be very creative, right? We had to understand the nature of the business of the client, understand the objectives of what the client wanted, and then be able to deploy that back. Right. So one client may be a government entity, and what we could say is that we had the highest rate of UAE nationals hired in the company. So we had the highest amortization rate. So for them, they were willing to pay a little bit more because they were receiving a service in UAE by UAE national talent. They were fostering this talent. But another company may not have cared about that because they were more price competitive. So we could say, well, actually, sure, we may not be more price competitive, but these are the other values that we may offer with it, which is, the ability to be in UAE, the ability to contract with us here, things like that. So we kind of had to really understand what our clients were about, what their values were, what they were really interested in, the outcomes that they were trying to get, so that we could tailor our solutions towards them rather than just offering up a service and say, this is what we do. We're cheaper, come to us. And so I think that was really formative because it involved us really thinking about how we would structure each solution.
Along with that, I guess disaster project, I think the disaster recovery process was also one of something that you worked along, right? So what were your major role in that, and what were you solving for that? I think that was a government project, if I'm not wrong, and how...
It was in the same company. So it was in the same company. When I was working in the technology aspect of that, it was exactly the same in the sense of, we were in charge of the infrastructure for a vast majority of our clients that were in our platforms. And so we created an identical data center in a different location in Dubai. And we basically ran a very advanced disaster recovery process in which it was 2 data centers that were active at all times. It wasn't very efficient, I will say. There are more cost-efficient ways, but cost was not an issue. It was more about the uptime. So we built a very strong resiliency. So we managed the project from the beginning to end. We had multiple different tests where we were doing cutovers involving clients and things like that. And it was very successful. We never had an issue. We never had any outages that actually impacted any of our SLAs. It was actually super interesting to have, to manage 2 data centers and make sure that all the replication of what's happening at all times. And it was awesome. It was great because as you scaled of one, you had to think about scaling of the other. You had to be really, really disciplined when you were deploying a change on one environment. You had to make sure that change was copied to the second environment, replicated there to make sure that there wasn't any issues. So we had to be very disciplined with our change management process, which thankfully we were. It was a very large company. We had in the IT space alone, I think for us, we had 250 people. So that was very large for us, right? But it's not in the scale of a lot of companies in India. But it was enough that we were able to manage the process very effectively. And so, we had the data center was very, very large in the sense of, the complexities and the VMs. It was something like 480 virtual machines or something like that we were managing. So it was no small feat, but it was awesome. It was very interesting.
Yeah. And I think after that, your next company, I think you spent a lot of time over there with different roles. I think MDC, you worked on a very significant projects in that company. And how did you actually, yes. And how did you, what are the projects that you were working on, and what teams were you leading in, and what roles were you responsible?
Sure. So that's when I kind of started working a little bit with project management as well. I started doing some work when it came to a firewall upgrade. I did a new office deployment, including the whole infrastructure for that office deployment, an international office deployment where we had an office in Brazil that we had to deploy there. So I worked in quite a few different projects when it came to that, a little bit more infrastructure. And that's kind of where I had in my career, I specialize in technology or I specialize in commercial. So which direction do I go to? And that's where I was kind of caught in the middle, and I was feeling things out. So I was doing a bit of both. I was wearing both hats to try to figure out which one did I really enjoy, because if I wanted to go further into technology, I would have to get more certifications. I would have to go further into PMP and things like that. And at the time, I just wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do. And so, it was a choice that I consciously made. I think it would have been a lot of fun, but I'm very happy with where I am. Sorry, you muted.
Oh, yes. So after that, how did 42 Abu Dhabi happen? And you actually landed as a CTO directly over there,
Yep.
from, looking into your journey from tech and then building up, understanding it, and then selling tech and working with it, and then leading tech at 42 Abu Dhabi, right? How was the journey, and how did that happen? And what are you solving over here at 42? E has a CTO and also a CEO, and
Sure.
yeah.
So 42 started as a concept in 2013 in France, and in 2018 they became a franchise model, which is accessible coding education. And the UAE needed to bring in coding talent. They needed to generate coding talent here. There's a big push to develop coders here in UAE, and 42 is an awesome concept. And so they wanted to bring it here, and they created a franchise, which is 42 Abu Dhabi. They created a branch here, and they said, we need the team. We need a team for 42 Abu Dhabi. And so they reached out to me, and at the time I was applying for the partnerships position. So I was going to lead the commercial discipline here for industry relationship and partnerships. But when they were talking to me, and during my interview, they asked me about, related to things about technology, application deployment, things like that. And there was a lot of synergy there between, what I did and what I love, which is technology, but also what I did for work, which is partnerships and running a successful commercial entity. And so even though we're a nonprofit, we do rely on partners to be able to support our students, to be able to run our projects and things like that. And so it became kind of a mix of both. And so they offered me the CTO position, which I thought at the time was very ambitious for them. I thought it was, I was not sure I was the best fit for the job, if I'm completely honest. But essentially the problem that we had at first was they needed someone to deploy this campus from scratch. We had nothing. We had nothing here. We had, they needed someone that would liaise with the central team, that would, be able to do the full deployment, which called upon the projects that I've done with deploying infrastructure and things like that. And so we deployed the technologies, we deployed all the applications, we get everything up and running. And we opened our doors. In 2021, we welcomed our first students. And so after that, it was more about, efficiency, creating, solving problems, right? So automation of reports, process automation, and process efficiency. So those were kind of the solutions that I was solving from the beginning, right? Being able to create reports to make better business decisions, and to be able to understand the data, look at correlations of students. How do we improve student performance, right? Going back and looking at what they're doing, where they're spending their time, where do we deploy our resources to get the most value out of what we're doing, because we're a very small team. And so it became a lot more related to that. Those were the problems that I was solving on a regular basis. And so it was one of those about, creative uses of technology, right? Making sure. And then at the same time, it's a technology school, right? So the students were also using technology. They were also coming up with problems. They were also finding ways into potentially different, potentially into our system. So how do we safeguard our system? So it was always very, very, very interesting. It's always very dynamic. So it's been a fantastic opportunity.
So Marcus, also being someone from not a tech background, and now that you're actually running a technology school where you're actually teaching people how to code, or someone who's not even having a background or never done any form of code, right? So now that you're in the tech leadership position, you understand how the tech works out there, and you are also having another look at the world of where people are learning tech from the students of 42 Abu Dhabi, right? So
Yep.
what, according to you, are the major, voids or the gaps that usually people have while they're learning tech in school, and the one which is actually applied out there in the real time? So do you think, is there any gap between that?
Huge. So I think again, it's the methodology of how people learn. I think way too many people are expecting answers to be given to them, where it's more about how do you ask the right question to get the right answer, rather than trying to get the answer first. And so I think there needs to be a much bigger emphasis on failure, especially with code. You can never get code right the first time. It's impossible. If somebody writes code and it runs the first time, they've probably done a mistake that they don't even know. It just doesn't work. It's an iterative process. You have to fail. You have to find bugs. You have to fix stuff. Like, it's never going to be perfect. And so the comfort with failure is very, very, very important when it comes to technology, and being able to accept that things are not going to be perfect. They're not going to be right the first time. And so this is kind of where I really think education needs to adapt a lot more. I think the way that we score things is not accurate. I think the way that we put emphasis on grades and the way that we do assessments are it's just not conducive to good technology education. I don't think so. And I also don't think that it needs to come from a top down. I don't think a teacher giving that information is exactly the way to go. I think it can be done at a lower level, which is in the peer-to-peer, which is what we do here. We don't have teachers. It's students learning from each other. It's finding it on the internet. It's trying something new. The organic process of collective intelligence is fascinating. You ask 5 different people the same question, they don't have an answer. You put all 5 of them in the room, they come up with an answer in an hour. It's unbelievable to see. And I think that is really the future of how education and how technology learning happens.
Yeah. And I also remember when we were on the call earlier, you were talking about how technology is not just about coding, right? And you also mentioned when it came to the business side of it, how you could
100%.
actually, how technology is one of the how it's imbibed in business itself, where you as a engineer or a developer, right, you can actually study what the customers need, and you have the leverage to work on that. So what do you mean by
100%.
tech not just being a code, not just being coding, according to you? Yeah.
Yeah, so 100%. It's exactly that. The technology is a horizontal. It's not a vertical, right? So it's not a pillar within the company. Technology now is everything. Anything that you are at, you can apply technology, whether it's with data, whether it's with whatever. I always find it fascinating that people look at tech companies and then don't realize that what their actual business is. Like, Airbnb started as a tech company, but today they're a real estate company. Why? Because they were able to take all the data of where people were vacationing, where people were staying, and they ended up investing in real estate in those areas, which generated way more revenue than they did with the booking platform. It's essentially they were able to think outside of the box. They became a data company that they then were able to create business decisions to generate their revenue further, right? That is exactly what it's about. It's thinking, okay, we do have the technology, but what does it mean? And my favorite is always about data, which is what, so what, then what, right? What's the data, right? Great. Everybody knows how to get data. Everybody knows what it looks like. Everybody can put it into Excel. So what? What does it mean? What does this data mean? What are you representing? The most important part, which a lot of people are not very good at, is the then what. That's the third step of the data analysis, which is what decisions can you derive from the data that you have? So you have the data, you can visualize the data, and you understand the data. What next? What are you going to do with that data? What can you action about it? And that process is really super important from a business perspective to be able to say, okay, well, this is what's next for the business. This is what makes strategic sense, right? And that's why for me, it is absolutely a horizontal. It embeds itself into everything because this can be applied to anywhere that you work at, can be applied to anything that you do, whether it's HR, finance, procurement. There's always efficiencies, there's always automations. And so it's really, really, really important to be able to consistently think about this process improvement type of way.
Yes. So Marcus, when it comes to that, right, and now that you understand tech and business very deeply, and I think you also mentioned where tech can also be positive and negative impact for a business, but it also depends on how you are leveraging it, how you are making it work for your business. Just like an example of Airbnb, where it turned its tech into, has one of the advantages where they could actually invest in the real estate for the other domain, where I think tech is actually ingrained in every business. And I think it could actually take business to another level, like us, and hit the skies of like where the sky would be the limit, right? And having said that, now that you work with different industries, right, from the consulting to you were working with tech, and now that you're leading tech. So, what are your factors that actually contributed to your success as a leader in tech industry? So, what do you think are the major factors for that? For not just for you, like if you say if anyone is aspiring to be what you are today, and any tech leader, what would the key factors would be for him to just focus and work on?
I think never think that you have the answers. I think that's kind of the main one, is never think that you know the answers, because when you think you do, you don't. I tend to always question, and I tend to always err on the side of caution. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, there's a problem with one of your systems, I will never say, no, you're wrong. I'll always say, maybe let's look into it. Having that kind of thinking that you have all the answers is when you start realizing that you have no answers. So for me, it's always just about being able to have an open mind and keeping an open mind and understanding that the world is changing, the world is improving, you need to be able to keep up, but also to understand that there are going to be a lot of people with a lot of different opinions and a lot of different answers, that yours may not be the most accurate one. Like right now, for example, I'm completely heartbroken because one of my major skills is Googling. I am actually a pretty good Googler. I find really interesting answers off of Google. I've always done it. It's been a skill set of mine, and ChatGPT has made that completely obsolete. So now I have to learn a whole new technology, how to use a whole new framework, and it's a bit heartbreaking for me to have to give up something that I've been good at for many, many years to learn something new. But hey, that's life. You have to keep this consistently changing process. So I think being able to kind of shed any ego from the beginning and understand that everybody has something to teach you, everybody has a valid opinion, then I think you'll be okay. I think there's a chance.
Yeah. And also, Marcus, let's say someone is actually in the business, and let's say they assume the help of a person with the technology, with the technical knowledge to scale further, right? Let's say you understand tech and you understand business, and you had a lot of companies that you work with to grow its revenue. let's say you're working with someone who has no understanding of tech, and you're the only person who understands tech. So how does that work? Because most of the companies, people in the leadership position, they have someone who just understands tech and the other person who just understands business right then and there, right? They
Yeah,
work in a
yeah,
horizontal, they work on a very vertical level of their niches and their expertise. So do you
absolutely.
think, is there any disadvantage of that, or you need to have 360 degrees understanding of how it works, or what is the take on that kind of businesses?
Not necessarily. I think it's a very valid approach. I think it depends on where your business is at what scale your business is at. Because the CEO that takes you to $1 million of revenue is not going to, it may not be the same CEO that takes you to 10 million, may not be the same CEO that takes you to 100 million, right? There are different scales, there are different expertises, there are different personalities, it's different priorities. And so it can be very valid for a company to have specialties, right? You can have a very, very specialized co-founder CTO, and it's a co-founder CEO that has no specialization in the technology whatsoever, and they work great together because they have great communication, great dialogue, a great ability to interact. And so it is a very valid approach. There's also the approach of jack of all trades that can do a little bit of everything. It really kind of depends on the company. It depends on the approach. I think every company has the ability to have success regardless of their approach, as long as there is the right team, as long as there's the right motivation, as long as there's the right communication, respect, transparency. Then I think it's really a matter of just what the structure works for that specific company and that specific environment. I've seen startups that have, I've seen tech startups where the founder and CEO has zero idea of tech, but then they hire someone that is absolutely a tech whiz. Not at the same level as them, but they understand when to defer, when to understand their instructions, when to understand their opinions. And so it is a riskier to be in as a CEO if you're with someone that you may not understand exactly what they're doing, because you need to make sure that their values are as aligned as you. But that just comes with people management, right? And that's just a portion of the people management, where it really depends on how you as a leader manage the team.
Yeah, yeah. So, Marcus, if I have to ask you a question, where you actually, now the position that you're in has a CTO, and when you started with your humble beginnings, just to, a self-learned coder, right? What do you think, let's say, just an engineering degree would be like a ticket for you to just like excel in tech as a leader, or anyone can do it because you have done it? Your journey is an example that if you actually show curiosity and try to work and just have an outer look of how that could be scaled upon and how that could be made more efficient in working, you can also achieve that, right? So when people are trying to start their journeys in tech and they're not reaching to a leadership level of tech, so where do you think they're falling apart? So what's something that you think is
Yeah,
going wrong?
I think that really comes with the business understanding, right? I think honestly, if I were to do it all over again, I probably would get an engineering degree and then just get an MBA, if I'm completely honest. Because I think honestly, I think it is really valuable to have both sides of the experience. And I will say, I do look back, and in a lot of ways, I was an absolutely terrible coder. I wish I was a lot better. And I do think that it would be much easier to have a specialized background that would then allow you to add a non-specialized layer like an MBA for you to be able to have both sides of the equation. I think sometimes I run into some trouble in my career because I am very, very, very out there and broad, right? I'm not necessarily education. I'm not mergers and acquisition. I'm not this, I tend to romanticize it and say that I'm just a technologist at the end of the day. I just love tech. So it's both good and bad, right? I can fit in a variety of different roles, but on the other hand, it's also one that it's not very, very, very specific. Like there's not somebody that's going to think of a role and say, you know what, this is the only person that can do this job. Not at all, right? That's not me. I'm not a scalpel. I'm more of a hammer. But on the other hand, I do think that approach is valid. I do think, especially, still nowadays, education is still very important, but just as important as the formal traditional education is the learning, the absolute learning mentality. Don't just do the education for the sake of doing the education. Learn to learn. Learn the process, appreciate the process. Don't just think about the grades, think about the assessments. Don't think about that. Think about how you're learning, your attitude towards learning, how you ask questions, how you find your answers. That is so much more formative than any degree that you might have. Because if you're someone who is able to come up with answers rather than somebody who's consistently asking questions, you are 10 times more valuable to any company because you are a problem solver. Problem solvers are genuinely people that are very well sought after.
Yeah. So how do you maintain a work-life balance in demanding roles such as CTO and CEO altogether, right? And how can you share any strategic tips or what's something that really worked for you personally? Just holding all the major roles like CTO and CEO altogether. Yeah.
Sure. First, I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible at work-life balance. I'll be completely honest. I'm a huge proponent of it. I consistently tell my staff to go home. I tell them not to work. I answer emails at night. You shouldn't. I'm a huge proponent of work-life balance, but I also know myself and I know that I am absolutely terrible at separating my life. I will answer emails in the middle of the night. That's just the way I am. So, but there is one thing that I've learned. There is one thing that I do, and I learned this from consulting. When I was in consulting, I would stay in the office 12, 14-hour days. What I started doing is I leave the office at 5, no matter what. I do go home and I do work when I'm home. Yes, absolutely. But I am not in the office. I'm able to spend some time with my family, spend some time with my kids. And yes, I'm working at night after the kids go to bed. I'm answering emails. Yes, I'm still working. Yes, I'm still putting in all the hours. Yes, there's many times where I'm working late and I'm working from home. But it's a different environment. I've taken myself out of the office environment. And that, in a way, that sets a little bit of an example because I don't expect anyone in my staff to stay here till 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. I don't think that's healthy. I want them to have a better work-life balance. And this isn't because I'm selfless. I want my staff to have a work-life balance because I'm selfish. The better work-life balance they have, the more productive they are. It's proven, it's scientific. So for me to have the most productive staff I have, I need them to be in the best balance and best mental shape as they have. So for me, yeah, it may be a bit weird where I'm telling them get out of the office at 5, sure, but it's because I know that I will get more out of them during the time that I do have them. And so that's why I don't expect anyone to stay late. And so for me, it also sets that example, right? I'm leaving. I don't expect anyone to be here. Everybody, don't kill yourself over this, because it's I always like the ethos that you should work to live rather than live to work. And so even though I'm terrible at applying all of that advice, very, very bad at it, I do try my best and I do try to keep it in mind. And sometimes, you just try your best to unplug. I've now realized that my biggest pet peeve, which is the notification icon on my emails, when there's a red number next to my emails, it used to drive me crazy. It always had to be at 0. I've now learned that I can't control that. I'm always going to have pending emails. There's always going to be notifications and there's nothing I can do about it. And so that's something that I just had to let go of. I just had to let go of that, that control of wanting to keep my notifications at 0. So slowly, I hope I'm getting better at it, but oh my God, I'm terrible.
Yes. So as a visionary and, someone who's actually leading the technology and the company itself, right, as a CEO, what is your vision, Marcus? If you see yourself in 10 or 5 years, what do you see yourself as?
Oh, man. I kind of thought about that. It's kind of like, where do I go from here, right? To be honest, my next venture will be on my own. I am very happy with everything that happened here. I'm very happy. I'm so fortunate to be able to launch such an ambitious project with the full support of the government of Abu Dhabi. It's immense. It's amazing, but it's one of those things where I just couldn't fail. If I failed, it would be because of me. There was no lack of resource, no lack of support, no lack of nothing. If I failed, it was just because of a lack of capability. And so it was just really nice to be able to do something with 0 risk, right? It was just about launching a project that I had no risk in. So now I'm feeling a little ambitious. I would like to start something on my own where there are real risks, where it's, it's something that it is my own. It'll be, from me from beginning to end. And so that's what I'm looking at next. And I think it will be around the realm of technology, obviously, but we'll see. I still have a little bit more of my mission here to complete, and then I'll see the next step. But I think in the next couple of years I will be doing that. This year I'm starting a master's program, so I'm taking it to a master's. So I don't think I'm gonna try to launch a company while doing a master's, but we'll see. I don't know how much my work-life balance is going to work with that, but who knows? We'll see. But I think my next venture will be something of my own.
Yeah. So what would be the advice that you could give to young Marcus and someone who's actually starting their career and who's aspiring to be a tech leader? So what would be the advice from 12 to 14 years of experience that you had working in industries of different sectors? So what would you advise for your younger self?
Man, I have no idea. I think the only thing I would say is just to keep learning. Like, stay hungry and work, work hard, keep learning, keep trying. I think that's the biggest thing is just, it took a long time for me to realize that inherently, naturally, I'm a lazy person. It took a long time for me to realize that I was lazy. And so when I realized that, I did everything I could to be as productive as possible, right? Because now I want to go against my own nature of being lazy. So it took a long time for me to accept that I may not be, that I am fairly lazy. And how do I outwork that laziness? How do I outwit my lazy self? And so because of that, I think it took me a long time to be actually truly effective. And that's probably the advice that I would give is like, hey, listen, don't worry. It's okay that you procrastinate. It's okay that you're lazy, but learn how to be more productive in the time that you are productive at. And so I think that would probably be it is just trying to consistently improve yourself. And, you can still have fun. You can still play games, but you can also, before you go to bed at night, play on Duolingo or, learn breathing techniques to be able to de-stress. Things that allow you to kind of add value to yourself still without necessarily, anything that makes you a little bit better tomorrow than you were today. Sorry, you're muted.
Yes. So if you could describe yourself in a sentence, what would that be?
Oh God, I have no idea. Probably obsessive, compulsive, controlling, like all those things that are, I tend to have a complete, an eye for detail, but it's also because of a want to be detail oriented. So I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. I'm terrible at that. I would probably say, when it comes to like something that I'm interested in, I would probably say I'm one of the more obsessive people you'll ever meet because I love learning. I love learning about any topic, any information. If somebody knows something about someone, I will latch onto that and have them just explain it to me and teach it to me because I think it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by absolutely everything. So that's probably what I would be. I'm sure some people find that very annoying, but it's just, there's always something interesting in everything. I think everything is fascinating. So I want to learn a little bit about everything. I think that's kind of the purpose.
Yeah. So we have an audience question from the live viewers that are watching, on LinkedIn and YouTube. So they're asking, now that you're CTO already, why do you want to do the masters and go back to the learning? Because you already had learning under your belt.
Oh, interesting. So I've received that question before. I actually received that question from the master's program. So the reason is because there is such a thing as you going through the experience and not realizing that you're going through something specific. The interesting thing about going into school is that you are removed from an environment that you're currently in, and you're looking through things through the lens of academia. So you're dissecting it kind of like from a top-down view. So when you're looking at a case study, when you're looking at something that's happened, when you're looking at an example, when you're reading an article, you're able to relate it to the experiences that you've had as a business. And then you're able to form that, oh, that's what happened. So it's like, there may have been some issue with organizational behavior. right? Which caused a toxic work culture. When you're in it, you may not know what contributed to that. You may not know what you could have done differently. But when you're looking at it from an academic lens, you're now able to relate your previous experiences and say, oh, that's what that was. That's what it meant. And this is how it could have been done differently. Okay, that makes sense. And so what I'm hoping for is to kind of go through the past 12, 15 years of my career with kind of a clinical lens and be able to say, okay, this is what this means. This is what this meant. This experience that I have, now I have a label for it. Now I've been able to see it through the eyes of learning. And like I said, I don't think anybody's ever done learning. And it also, to be completely honest, it looks good on the resume.
Yes. Well, that brings us to the end of this interview, Marcus, and I had an amazing time listening to your journey,
Thank you so much.
and I'm sure all of our listeners have, because most of them are just like, flooding the live chat saying, I'm also a self-learned developer, and I just like to learn myself, and something that your journey
Awesome.
is one of the inspiration that when you see the other person do it, that on that impact and on that greatness, you know that you could, give it a try, give it a hit, right? And from your journey, I personally had a lot of learnings. Let's say the curiosity that you had to learn things by yourself, not just being attached to one domain, but just to have like a 360-degree understanding of how the whole entire business works, right? And never give up, and manage your manager and understanding the job in and out was something that I would definitely, advise all the viewers to take away. Not because obviously that's something that we are, imbibed with, where we think that what manager is saying is what we have to listen, but then usually it's the other way around, right? We have to understand what are the needs, and something that how we could help him to maybe deliver a project in a better way, something. So you have to like
100%.
maybe think about that. And I think the whole journey of you has been a major part around your retrospective attribute. So you retrospect a lot, right? Looking into how you
Yeah.
have done it and what are your mistakes, and even if the successes, why did that happen, and how a company could leverage it, right? And yeah, that was a great journey, and I knew that this was something that I had to bring it out for the other viewers, not just for me,
Thank
but
you.
also inspiring tech people, not just to be in tech, but what they could do with tech in terms of business if they're trying to venture into one. And thank you once again,
100%.
Marcus, for joining us. It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much for having me.
It was, and we would look forward to have more such conversations with you. And thank you
Thank you
once
so
again for
much.
joining us again.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yes.